The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to writers and journalists and newscasters and photographers and filmmakers and videographers, giving you an idea about what they're thinking about, what they're saying about, and some insight as to what's going on. This evening we have a great show. For the second part of our show, we're going to be talking with one of the foremost political writers for city and state New York. But at the beginning of the show, we're going in a different direction than we normally do with my good buddy Howie Karpin, who is a sports writer for New York Sports Day and also an official scorer at Major League Baseball. Always a pleasure to say good evening to Howie Karpin. How are you, Mr. Karpin?
Oh, great. Always great to be with you, Gary.
Let's start at the top, really. I mentioned that you're an official scorekeeper for Major League Baseball. Maybe some people don't fully understand what does that mean. So let's define our terms. What do you do as an official scorekeeper?
Well, basically, you're the statistical guru for that game. You determine the stats and you create the box score. I mean, your responsibilities are, you have the subjective calls of hits and errors and pass balls and wild pitches. You have to determine, what's an earned run and what's not an earned run. So you basically are creating the statistics for that particular game, and it's a pretty big responsibility.
In order to do that, I mean, because the baseball has such finite rules, I'm guessing you've spent and still spend a lot of time with the rule book.
Yeah, I'm always going over the rule book and finding things I didn't know before. So, I mean, there are sometimes there are actually calls on the field, that are not subjective, but you have to determine what's going on that involve the rule book, and the media people are going to look to you almost as the authority on that. I had a situation with the Mets and the Reds way back when in the early 2000s at Shea, where the Reds batted out of order and no one knew the rule. Luckily, I knew the rule, and people came over and they were quoting me. So they kind of rely on you to know, at least, I don't know the book cover to cover, but at least I know where to look in case a situation arises.
Have there been any calls? Now, you do the games at Yankee Stadium and Citi Field. Have there been any calls this year that you said, gee, that was a tough one? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, there was an appeal that I disagreed with where they overturned my call. I'll give you a situation. It was against San Diego a couple weeks ago. Michael Conforto hit into the shift, and the second baseman on San Diego went a couple of steps to his right to backhand the ball in the outfield. And if he fielded it, he would have thrown Conforto out, but he booted the ball. I called it an error. Conforto appealed to the league because it's his right to nowadays. It's actually in the CBA. So the league overturned the call and ruled a hit instead of an error, and they gave Conforto another hit. I disagree with the call, but it's their toy, as I like to say, and I just use it a little while.
I remember years ago you telling me, and I don't know if you still do this, that after a game, a lot of times you'll go downstairs and ask a player and say to a player, hey, what do you think? Was I being fair or was I being tough? Do you see it as a hit or an error? Does that still go on, or has the game kind of been flattened so it doesn't really happen like that anymore?
Not as much because of this appeal system. They really. Sometimes, here's what's developed over the years. This is my own impression. Sometimes they'll try and sway you on the spot because they know they're not going to win an appeal. Now, last year I had two calls in the same homestand with Todd Frazier at bats, where I called errors on both of them instead of hits, and he lost both appeals. So
you were right.
The second one, he actually tried to get in touch with me during the game and to have a meeting after the game But MLB would not allow me to do that, so that never transpired.
That's fascinating. I want to talk about the Mets and Yankees, but I just one quick question, because you see more baseball than a lot of us. Is the ball juiced? Is the ball different than it used to be? I mean, because of all the home runs. I mean, we know the game and the nature of the game is changing, but the ball's flying out of there. I mean, last night, J.D. Davis hit one 450 feet. Who could imagine that?
Well, the ball is definitely, there's something going on with the ball because of the way it's stitched. The stitches are very low. They're not raised. You know, when they're raised, pitchers can do things with them, and they maybe don't travel as far. I'm not a physics professor, but now you have the players nowadays are in so much better shape, you know, physically, and, you know, with all the training that's available, and now with the philosophy of the launch angle, you know, there's going to me, the alarming amount of home runs go to the opposite field. That's what's crazy. It's not so much pulling the ball, but the opposite. Now, look, you got a Yankee Stadium with a short right field. You got a Philly Citizens Bank is like a bandbox. You know, you're putting these guys in these small places, so they're hitting a lot of homers. But, yeah, I think the ball has something to do with it, and you may see a reduction next year when they manufacture different baseballs.
Every guy the Yankees have brought up, every guy they put in their lineup has produced. I mean, you just can't have that kind of luck or good fortune. But still, you look at that pitching staff. I mean, you know, you had mentioned to me that they needed 3 good starters to make it all the way. What are your thoughts about the Yankees' chances?
Yeah, they're going to have to get starters innings. But as I told you when we talked before, you can live off your bullpen in the playoffs. You can't do it in the regular season. But you don't want to get into early holes where even if your bullpen is effective and you don't have the lead, you're still going to lose. So you got to get at least, you know, 5 or 6 out of your starters from at least 3 guys. I mean, I could see them going with this opener thing in one of the games if they had to. You know, it's almost like when they go with an opener, it's almost like the starter gets knocked out early anyway and you got to go to your pen. With the opener, it's planned to do that. So if you have a deep enough pen, you can get away with it. But if you don't, you're going to get burned. So, you know, if they have Tanaka going, if Domingo Germán at least is decent, he hasn't been in the playoffs yet. You don't know what you're going to get. James Paxton's going to have to raise his game a level. So we'll see. I mean, they have a really good team. They're definitely one of the contenders. The Astros are terrific. The Dodgers are one of the great teams right now. So I think the Yankees are in that pantheon, but, you know, you're right, that their pitching could hold them back. Now, their offense is much better than it was the last 2 years, even though, you know, Stanton hasn't been there, and you mentioned all these guys that are producing. They're hitting better with runners in scoring position, and I like to say they used to rely on the home run the last 2 years, and those can dry up in the playoffs. This year, they don't rely on it. They utilize it, and they're much better with runners in scoring position and situational hitting.
And maybe that's because of the absence of a guy like Stanton. You know, it kind of makes other guys play the game a different way. How big a concern is Aaron Judge hasn't played that well? I mean, I don't know how you can't couch it any other way. He hasn't been the star that I guess they need him to be.
The concern is he's not pulling the ball, you know? I mean, he always had the power to the opposite field. But to me, he's coming off an oblique injury, and he's not pulling the ball. He may not be able to extend through the strike zone. Pitchers will get a grip on that. They'll pitch him inside. If you notice, they've changed his eye level. Everyone's complaining about those low strikes. Well, he's got to be swinging at them if they're going to keep calling him. I mean, it's not a matter of whether the umpires are screwing you or not. If you know they're calling him, swing. But they're trying to change his eye level. If you notice, they pitch him low and then they pitch him upstairs because, you know, he is trying to launch, and he's such a big guy. Anyone who tries to launch nowadays, Keith Hernandez touched on it 2 years ago, they're going to pitch you upstairs. And it's very difficult to launch when you can pitch up above the letters.
Howie, let's talk about the team at Citi Field. If I told you that Rosario was going to hit 300, that J.D. Davis would be at 310, that Conforto was going to get big RBIs, that Alonso was going to break National League power records, and that DeGrom was going to be at a Cy Young level, you'd have said, hey, guess what? This is going to be a playoff team. What do you think?
Well, guess what? I picked them to make the playoffs before the year on those accounts.
There you go.
Except for Alonso, because obviously I couldn't anticipate he'd be this good. But I thought Rosario would be better. I liked what I saw in the second half from him offensively. defensively early on he went a little backward, but whoever's worked with him deserves a raise because they've gotten his footwork straightened out. He's much better on the first step. He's improved like leaps and bounds in a very short time. And when McNeil comes back, I would keep Rosario at leadoff and Matt McNeil second.
I was thinking the same thing. Yep, I agree.
Right, because McNeil could take advantage of that hole on the right side. Rosario has more speed than McNeil. He's more of a speed threat. And they're not going to walk McNeil even if Rosario steals second.
That's right.
Because you got Alonso behind him. So, their offense is pretty balanced and pretty darn good. And, it's the best offense they've had here in a long time.
How do you get Diaz to be something like he was last year? I mean, I'm not talking about 50 saves, but, I mean, the guy is just completely unpredictable and unreliable.
Yeah, he is at this moment in time. But, it's funny. You were talking about the baseballs being juiced for hitters. The pitchers are having trouble getting their grips on these balls because of the lack of stitches. Masahiro Tanaka's had trouble getting his splitter. Maybe Diaz has had trouble with the slider, and his fastball looks flat, not as lively as it was last year, not as much movement. That could be from the ball itself, and they're trying to get him to adjust. Plus, he's coming off a career year last year. To duplicate what he did last year would be unrealistic, but they didn't expect the bottom to drop out like it did.
Yeah, certainly.
So if they can get him, they're going to have to get him going because Gazelman's out for the year now, apparently.
Right. Howie, Brodie Van Wagenen has gotten a lot of criticism for some of the moves he's made. But I got to tell you, he's got to get credit for that Joe Panik pickup. That is a top-notch pickup of a good major leaguer right at a time when you needed him most.
I agree. I'm surprised the Giants let him go. And another guy that he deserves credit for, and I wrote about this when they got him back in January, I called it a very interesting move, was J.D. Davis. I mean, he was a good ball player. He's only getting blocked because Alex Bregman was the Astros' third baseman, and they had a bunch of young guys already on the team. So they took, like, the Astros surplus. This guy has been a real key to their resurgence. He's gotten a lot of big hits. Last night gives them the lead with that two-run bomb. He's hitting righties and lefties. And right now they're playing him in the outfield. He's doing okay. He's not the greatest, but you live with it the way he's hitting.
Yep.
So, yeah, he's made some good moves, and he's made some bad moves. I mean, Jed Lowry hasn't played a lick. So
we don't have to talk about that.
Right, and Cano, Robinson Cano wasn't the same. And
well, listen, Howie, we're going to have to get going, but if you pick J.D. Davis at the beginning of the season, I think from now on in April I'm going to talk to you a little more often because that's a hell of a prediction on your part, I got to tell you.
Well, I thought it was interesting because I looked up his record and I thought he could be a decent player. And obviously he's turned into one. You hope it's going to continue.
Howie, as we get closer to the playoffs, maybe playoff time, both teams will be in, and we'll have a similar dialogue and assess where we're at now. At that point, Howie Karpin, the great Howie Karpin, great Bronxite, been here all his life, just like me. And we'll see you around town. Keep calling them balls and strikes and hits and errors and wild pitches and pass balls.
Yeah, anytime you want me, you got me.
All right, you're the best. There we go, the great Howie Karpin, ladies and gentlemen. And we're going to switch hats, switch gears, and go right from baseball and sports to politics. Don't go away. We'll be back right after this.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self. And I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family? This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything. Oh, sorry. Go along, son.
it's always worth it.
Whoa, master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
You know what, guys? There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
Hey, it's Ava, and this is Tess from Vivo's Do It Yourselfie, where we recreate the hottest looks from today's biggest music videos.
After cleaning out our closet, we have a lot of clothes we don't wear anymore.
Like this old t-shirt.
It's not garbage, it's actually a brand new rug.
And to make it, all you need to do is cut, tie, and glue.
Cut the t-shirt into strips.
Tie the strips into knots.
And glue the knots to the bath mat. I love it. Give your garbage another life.
And recycle.
Hey, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. Always love talking to Howie Karpin. He knows a lot, gives you a lot of really good insight. But as I said, we're switching gears now. We're going to talk politics with a writer for a publication that is emerging as really one of the most important ones when you're talking about New York City and New York State politics and other kinds of doings, City and State magazine. Let's say hello to Jeff Coltin, who writes for City and State New York. Nice to have you with us, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Always happy to talk to the Bronx.
There you go. Well, we certainly talk the Bronx here on BronxNet Television. Let's talk a little bit. You put out an article about a woman named Dianne Morales, who has worked for years in a South Bronx not-for-profit, and all of a sudden she becomes, I guess, the first official female candidate for mayor. So let's start there, and then we'll expand to some of the other candidates. What about an outsider seeking the mayor seat right now in this day and age? Is that the kind of thing you think voters will relate to?
That's very possible. You know, this is part of the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez effect. I think everybody is wondering if the mayor's race is going to get a candidate like her, somebody that comes out of not an elected official role, comes out outside of the political world, and can shake up this race. You know, the other candidates in the race right now are all really experienced, long-time political figures, elected officials. So Dianne Morales, she's leads a social service nonprofit in Phipps Neighborhoods, based in the South Bronx. She thinks she can be that candidate, the one that comes out of nowhere and speaks to voters in a different way and represents change. You know, there are so many different steps or things that'll have to happen for her or really any candidate to do well, including fundraising. We know what AOC did in the Bronx. It was really a very grassroots campaign. But, you know, as opposed to running for one congressional seat, as significant as that was, to raise enough money to be mayor, boy, I got to tell you, that is not that easy to do. How does that work? And certainly the campaign, our friends at the Campaign Finance Board are going to say we've made it easier for grassroots candidates. Easy enough for someone like this to emerge? No, and you know, I have to be realistic about her chances here. I mean, Dianne Morales is a very, very long shot for mayor in 2021. It's tough to become New York City mayor, and there's a couple candidates in the race that have been working at this for years. I mean, for example, Eric Adams, the Brooklyn borough president, he has literally been working towards the campaign for mayor since at least 2006, maybe earlier. He's had his heart set on this job. Dianne Morales, a little more recently, she decided she wants to run for mayor. She does not have a big name recognition across the city. She doesn't even have big name recognition in the political world. We've probably given her the best favor she's had right now after your article expanding on that article. Yeah, I wrote the first article about her candidacy, and I don't think anybody else, any other outlets have even really picked it up yet. Right. She's kind of a fringe candidate at this point. And I mean, part of that is her own choice. She hasn't pitched herself to the press yet. And of course, the Democratic primary for New York City mayor is 22 months away. I know. Not until June 2021. So I should, you know, let's take it easy here. Take a deep breath. In the next 20 months. You know, many people believe that had 9/11 not happened, that Freddie Ferrer would have ultimately won the primary and become the mayor of the city of New York. How would you assess right now, given that we are 22 months ahead?
How would you assess what Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. Has done and where he stands in the race? I don't think there's any doubt that he is one of the possible viable candidates here.
Definitely. So he is one of the, there's kind of four leading candidates at this point who have been raising a lot of money and planning on this for a long time. Like I mentioned, Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer, New York City Council Speaker Corey Johnson, and of course, the Bronx Borough President since 2009, I believe, Ruben Diaz Jr. Mm-hmm. And Ruben, I mean, he is right up there with the rest of them. You know, he's raising money, he's traveling across the city, he's building up connections here. Admittedly, though, he has struggled with fundraising more than those other three candidates. You know, he has about $1 million in his campaign account right now. That's it's relatively weak compared to the rest of them. Mm-hmm. And of course, as we noted before, there's still time. There's still 22 months before the primary. But if he doesn't pick up the pace soon, it's certainly worrisome for his candidate.
It'll make it more difficult. I want to switch gears a little bit. You mentioned to me before the show, and I really hadn't thought about it. And again, we are still far away, but it is interesting to note. And you said you're working on a piece about the race for controller. I have to be honest with you, I haven't even thought about who might run because, of course, Scott Stringer is term limited out. So what are your thoughts? What's the field like? You know, give us the first feelers of who might run for controller.
That's right. I'm always focused on the future here as a political reporter. So we're looking at the controller's race as well. It's basically the second most powerful political position in New York. So it's a big job, you know. $200 billion in pension assets are under their control. Right now, the leading candidates are New York City Councilwoman Helen Rosenthal, represents the Upper West Side of Manhattan. New York City Councilman Brad Lander represents the Park Slope area, Cobble Hill of Brooklyn. There's Assemblyman David Weprin, who represents an area of Eastern Queens. And then there's a couple candidates who might jump in, still on the fence about this, a couple state senators. There's State Senator Brian Benjamin, kind of a rising star from Harlem, and there's State Senator Kevin Parker from Central Brooklyn. So that's 5 major candidates who are interested in the position now, who are raising money, putting out their feelers, and considering a run for this powerful position.
Well, you know, it's a very powerful position. Of course, you know, I was listening for the word Bronx in any of the things you said, and I didn't quite hear that. But so, just in a general way, what ultimately determines who, you know, wins the race for controller? In other words, what do voters focus on? Because it's very hard to tell who can be the best accountant, who can be the best investor for the city of New York. You know, I mean, Scott Stringer, certainly in his potential run for mayor, has been doing studies of things that people are interested in. How do New Yorkers, or how should New Yorkers evaluate a candidate so they can say, this would be my favorite for controller?
I think people generally treat controller kind of like a second mayor. You know, they act as an auditor for the city, so kind of a check on everything that the mayor does. So voters should just be looking for somebody they trust to kind of be a second leader of the city, somebody to keep an eye on the mayor, and also somebody that they trust investing the city's money, and you know, making sure that grows and that the civil service workers are treated well in retirement.
Let me just interject. The key word from what I heard from what you just said was the word trust. Because if that, you know, it's almost like, you know, do you trust your uncle to manage your bank account, so to speak, or aunt? I mean, I certainly don't want to be gender specific about it. And I think in a way that's what you want. Is this the person you trust to handle the large pension fund and then make the right choices? And of course, you know, make decisions about, wait a minute, where are we wasting money and where could we do better?
That's right. And, you know, I do have to note, so controller, I mean, admittedly, it's generally considered a pretty boring position, right? They don't get the glory of mayor. They don't get to, you know, cut ribbons at press conferences, whatever.
Yeah, I tried not to say that, but I appreciated that you put it right on the table.
Well, in 2013, we had a very exciting race because the former governor, Eliot Spitzer, who went down in a prostitution scandal, he was trying to win the race for city controller as his political comeback. As we all know, that didn't happen. And Scott Stringer, apparently voters trusted him more, and he has been in that position for the past 6 years.
Yeah, there you go. Listen, before we let you go, I want to just talk about this race for the 15th Congressional District. Congressman Jose Serrano will be retiring. And boy, the candidates, I used my fingers before, they keep coming out of the woodwork. I'm going to just pose this. I mean, the one candidate that really sticks out is the borough president's father, and that is Reverend Ruben Diaz. Do you think that the primary will be split so far in with 5 or 6 other candidates running that it will open the door for a candidate who, you know, certainly his politics don't jive with the kinds of candidates Bronxites usually elect? Do you think that is a factor that could ultimately determine this race?
Absolutely. And, my colleague at the Norwood News, David Cruz, he's done some good reporting on this issue. The concern among progressives and those on the left side of the Democratic Party, they're afraid that all of the more liberal candidates are going to split the vote. That's City Councilman Richie Torres, Assemblyman Michael Blake, now former New York City Council Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito. They might kind of split the vote among the
Marlene Cintrone of the BOEDC is announced as well.
That's right, another woman entering the race. So there's a lot of candidates that identify as progressive. There's only one, the Reverend Ruben Diaz Sr., who holds such socially conservative views. Mm-hmm. And the thought is that, he might be able to pull this off.
And I'm willing to bet that if it lays out this way, the GOP will put a little bit of resource into that, because they'll say, wow, we could practically, turn probably the most liberal seat in Congress into a conservative Democrat. That would be extraordinary.
Right, but it is not your typical seat, because it is such a heavily Latino, heavily Puerto Rican, heavily Christian seat. I mean, it's not your typical Democratic seat here. It's a very interesting dynamic. And, I think everyone's going to be watching that really nationwide to see what happens.
I will give you a little background. I had interviewed Councilmember Richie Torres, and I posed this same thing to him. And I said, well, so at some point, maybe you all ought to look at each other and say, well, who really realistically could do this? And maybe for kind of the good of, what we believe in, we ought to do that. And he smiled very wryly at me, and he looked at me and he said, that's not how politics works, does it? Oh, I think he said that's not how campaigns work. That's what he said. So I said, well, I guess that's not in the offing. Although certainly, if you're interested in issues, maybe that's the way to go. Listen, you want to give the state legislature a grade? I would say, and I've covered this for decades, literally, probably the most active and most productive state legislative season we've ever had. And
that's amazing what happens when everybody is a Democrat up there.
I guess so.
The state government has been split, Republican and Democrat. This year we saw a unified government, so they passed an incredible number of bills, and major ones too.
Right. Listen, Jeff Coltin, I'm glad we've had you on the Bronx Buzz this evening, and I'm really looking forward as we get closer to the 22 months and even to the congressional race next year. I'm hoping to have you back here, and we'll yap it up in the borough of the Bronx. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Always here to talk politics in the Bronx.
In the BX. There you go. Jeff Coltin from City and State New York on the Bronx Buzz. And that will do it for us this evening. We thank you for joining us. And on Bronx Talk, speaking of politics, on Bronx Talk, we will have Assemblymember Marcos Crespo, chair of the Bronx Democratic Party.